But I found out that she had this really wild grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, a General Frederick Funston. If you're in San Francisco, there's a Fort Funston and the Funston Avenue, and he's known as the guy who saved San Francisco in the 1906 earthquake. The Smithsonian Magazine, May 89 edition, did a story on his life, and they included this journey he had across Alaska. He'd been hired by the USDA to go up to Alaska, collect botanical samples, and see what the heck was up there. He started his journey on April 10th. I was like, oh, my birthday, what a coincidence. And then I continued to read, and he had traveled 1,500 miles total down the Yukon River. I was like, wow, I did 1,500 miles too. That's crazy. And then he snowshoed down the frozen Yukon River, and along the way, he shot and killed a sled dog to eat because he was starving. And I'm like, that's crazy, because I actually skied down the Yukon River, and I also saved a sled dog from being shot and killed, and he became my companion and helped me pull my sled. And then my great-grandfather, with two buddies, cut down 3 trees and built an 18-foot-long canoe. And I'd cut down 3 trees, and I'd built an 18-foot-long canoe. He did his trip in 1894, and I did my trip in 1994. And he was 27 and turned 28 along the way. And I was 27, and I turned 28 along the way. And I'm thinking to myself, this is mathematically impossible.
Reinette Senum, thank you so much for joining me here on the Human Freedom Project podcast.
My pleasure.
It's a real honor to be talking to you. I've been kind of following you for a few years. And as we were just discussing, I'm excited to talk to you about so many things. I don't even really know where to start, because I believe everything is connected. And, we can't point to any one thing and think we have the whole picture as far as what's going on in our world, where we should turn to find truth. Or solutions. So there's a lot to talk about here with you. I was asking a dear friend of mine, and he's also the co-founder of the Human Freedom Project. He's going to be editing this. His name is Stephen. I was asking him, what should I talk to Reinette about? And he asks the best questions, actually. I love his questions. And he said, he took a minute, and then he asked, what do you think her genius is? I love it. And immediately an answer came. When I see your genius, it feels like such a part of you that I don't think you could not be this. Which is, I had this vision of like the buffalo turning to the storm. and you just kind of, it's like innate in you to just turn towards storms and face them, and maybe even run into them. And so I thought we might just start with that. Where, if you agree with that.
I do call myself a human tank. I'm kind of a human tank.
And where do you think that came from? I'm actually really curious. I've heard you tell your story, and maybe we'll get into that today, but I'm kind of curious, what was 6, 7, 8-year-old Reinette like?
Right. Oh boy. Well, interestingly enough, I was a very hyper kid, lots of energy, had a big imagination, was running outside a lot and sailing a lot in my little boat, and swimming and playing mermaids in the water and chasing after deers with my hammer and my net. I was going to catch them that way. And with my dog, I played a lot with my dog, and really kind of lived out in the country at the time. And I was a very energetic, feisty, smart-mouthy, funny, silly, rambunctious, exuberant kid. And I was in trouble regularly, but not the kind of trouble like, oh, she tried to burn down the house or choke a cat. It was more like, Reinette's speaking out again, or Reinette's misbehaving, or Reinette's being loud. It was that kind of thing. And, but I was also I loved animals, right? I loved little things and caring for things. And I loved dogs and birds. And so I had a great love for nature around me. And I was raised on a lake. So I really got connected to the wind and the sky and the weather and the seasons, and loved it when the, bald eagle would nest across the lake, and there'd be, these little eaglets we'd watch, be born and grow and continue on their way. And so, and I was adopted, so I never really quite fit into my natural family. And they were both hardworking parents, right? My adopted parents. One was a Teamster truck driver. My mother was a registered nurse, and they were hard workers. And so I definitely knew right from wrong. They taught me that. And they also taught me a really, really good work ethic. I mean, if I ever said the words, I'm bored, they're like, oh, you're bored.
We have something for you to do.
Well, ironically, I like doing that kind of stuff. Like I would just go out there and march down the driveway, or I'd prune the roses, or I'd pull the weeds. And even as a kid, which is so weird for, kids these days, but I realize my work is an extension of myself, how I, perform my work is like who I am and how I show up. So yeah. And then, growing up as a teenager, that continued, but I was always, vice president or president of my class or president of clubs and always in the verge of being kicked out of school because I didn't like bullies. So I'd really go after my bully teachers and just give them absolute grief. And so I was always, I said the head of my class and always on the verge of being kicked out. And then in '84, I graduated from high school and I was a class clown. I got, elected as the class clown of 1984. So I was very excited about that because I really love laughter. I love to make people laugh. And I did a lot of theater growing up, tons of theater. Theater and sailing was kind of my ways to escape overbearing parents. Yeah, so it's really kind of, I've changed, but I haven't changed, I might be a little more conscious of my voice and how I use it and so on. And that's definitely comes from, I'm sure my genes, I had a loud, robust family and that still is present, I think. So.
All right. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I can definitely see it. I can picture you. So my audience may or may not actually know who you are. Obviously, I do. So you were mayor of Nevada City,
California.
In California, and you grew up in California, yeah.
This area actually, since I was born in San Francisco, but raised up here in Nevada County, California.
And you were pretty vocal through the COVID era, which is how I became aware of you. Pretty early on, I think, actually. I was like, yes! Like, there's one person actually in the government speaking in.
Yeah. Might have been the old. So, there's actually a couple, about 3 of the people I know in the state of California that were elected officials that were really calling it out. 3.
Who were the other ones?
Sue Foster. She's the county supervisor of Sacramento. And then Peter, what's Peter's last name? He's down in Southern California. And then Kurt Uger we have of Placer County. They were the only ones I know in the California that were actually really like vocal and calling things out. And they were, they're getting hit hard, of course, getting hit hard.
Well, I thought we'd just say their names really quick. And I'm not aware of them, but yeah, thanks. And even though I've been pretty straightforward about my perspectives on things, it might come as a shock to some of my audience, what I really think, but that's why I'm excited to start this podcast. So I wanted to talk to you because of your experience through this whole situation, but also because of who you are. So it's both. The mission, as I was telling you before we started, of the Human Freedom Project is to free our thinking and cultivate the courage to heal.
Right.
And there's so much wrapped up in that. I'm curious what comes to mind for you when I say free our thinking and cultivate the courage to heal.
Well, I think it's a great tagline. It's a great mission. And I think that's the biggest conundrum of all is I think we have a lot of people who have made a very deep subconscious choice to walk themselves to the grave rather than to confront and really, take a hard look at the truth. And the truth is that we've been living in a very fabricated reality. It lies historically, geographically, culturally, religiously, and so on. And I think when you start to really, scratch that surface, you realize what a deep rabbit hole it really is. And that means that, you've got to really grapple with the fact that, whoa, maybe the goals I've had in my life, maybe the life that I've lived, maybe the relationships I've had around me aren't really what I thought they were. Or, so many of us, our identity is wrapped up in who we are, right? Do I have an MD? Do I have a PhD? Am I an attorney? Blah, blah, blah. And if you find out, that maybe that industry is not the industry you thought it was, then you have to look at yourself and like, well, then who am I? And a lot of people, that takes a lot of courage. And I think that, as we know, public education, Rockefellers and the Carnegies, they had two goals out of public education. The first one was to remove all originality from the individual, from the student. And the other was to actually remove any possibility of dissent from the individual. And they've done a darn good job of that. And so, we're living in a society where a lot of the backbone that we used to have and willingness and to think and critically think has been systematically removed through the education system. And then, social media and so on does another number in movies. And so I think that it's, we have a lot of people these days saying, how can we wake people up? How can we wake them up? I said, well, look, I've been trying to wake people up for years, actually decades, especially the last 3.5 years. And I said, I can't. It's not, first of all, it's not my job, because I have to realize it's not my job. A, and B, people have already made that choice, essentially. The vast majority of people who are on one path, who have gone down and, done as they were told, I don't know if they're going to have it in them to actually face such difficult truths. Because the truth is not for people with thin skins and weak backbones. It's just not. And it's not just because the truths are hard themselves, but how people react to your truth.
Yeah.
Well, it's been shocking to me. That's one of the biggest lessons for me has been, I'd always taken people at face value. Like, I trust you, I believe in you, what you say, I believe, unless proven otherwise. It's kind of it's reverted to this 180, as far as like, I will believe you once proven true, because I realize we're living in such a false reality. And I have certain goals and objectives, which is to make a better world. And the best place to do it is my own community. And I always think everybody wants to better the world. Everybody wants to better their community. Everybody wants to make things more beautiful and hospitable and balanced and equitable, blah, blah, blah. Well, no, that's actually not the case. And when I was calling out difficult truths, when I was calling out criminality or things that are happening behind closed doors, I was floored by some of the reactions I get throughout the community. It's like, well, don't you want to stop corruption? Don't you want to? It's like, no, actually, some of these people are benefiting from the corruption, or their spouses are benefiting from the corruption, and you just need to keep your mouth shut because you're rattling our boat. So that was a bit of a shock. But truth tellers, they're hard to come by. And when you meet them, you should really just say thank you, because you have no idea how thick their skin really is. They have to have extraordinary thick skin. They have to have really good reach to take the arrows out of their back. They got to have a really good reach.
Yeah. So this is actually something I'd love to dive into in both a personal way with you, and then maybe go back out into the world, because this is what it's about for me. So, I work with people in pain. I teach courses to people who are experiencing pain to try to help them move towards freedom. Most people are seeking freedom from the pain.
Right.
And I know you understand the difference between seeking freedom from, which is a permission-based, narrative that's never going to lead where you want it to, versus seeking the freedom to, the freedom to whatever, to live in a, healthy environment, the freedom to, if someone even can't run, the freedom, that was me actually, couldn't run for 8 years because of knee pain. And I wanted the freedom to run. I didn't want freedom from pain. And so ironically, whether it's something as seemingly insignificant, but personally significant as pain, and I want the freedom to run, or something like the pain of the world, in my opinion, we have to actually accept the pain and turn towards it. And this is why I'm interested in talking to you, and perhaps we'll go into your story, because I do believe, and I've heard you say it, that the experiences you had in your 20s undoubtedly helped you know what to turn towards and cultivate the fortitude necessary to move through all the obstacles.
Right.
With no guarantee of success.
Right.
And
that's right.
And yeah.
There's absolutely no guarantee. And it may not be the success you expect too, right? I mean, I always say to people that, having a goal is literally just an excuse for you to get on the road, kind of falling forward, just moving forward. And And then you just kind of, the conundrum is you have to have this goal to get on the road. But once you get on the road, you got to kind of let go of the exact goal, because life might have different plans for you. Generally, they're better plans.
Yep.
And so it's kind of this conundrum. It's just set the goal, see yourself there, looking back, and then start rolling, and then life will help you steer.
So I know you've told this story many times. So are you interested in sharing your story again?
Which story?
The Alaska story and your lineage story.
Yeah.
I won't spoil it for people if they haven't heard it, because it's quite remarkable. In my opinion, it's you've said this. I think it's a story that needs to be told, because there are things that happen in this world that you really can't explain with logic, and it's not statistically possible. What happened to you?
Right.
And but it points to something that I feel is really important that all of us orient ourselves to, which is a felt sense for destiny. Maybe that's too big of a word, but I believe we feel truth in the body, and if we and that our bodies are actually tuning forks for truth, and it could be a true path, or it could be hearing the truth when another person speaks it. But when I hear your story, I hear someone listening to her tuning fork of the true path, leading you to things that end up being truth that you never could have sought out had you actually tried to with your mind. With that, I don't. Would you guide us through?
Yeah. So as I'd mentioned before, as being an adopted kid, I started looking for my natural parents when I was 11, and purely just because we had a great aunt come over from England who showed my adoptive mother her family. We went back like 900 years, and I was like, wow. And then it dawned on me, this isn't my family. It's not my blood. It's my family, but not my blood. And so I asked my mom, well, when do I get to find out about my family? And she said, oh, no, you can't know that. That's illegal. It was illegal at the time in California. And I was floored. Well, once again, happenstance would be that the next day in the newspaper, there's an article about adoptees looking for their natural parents. And I was like, of course. So I took the email, or to the email addresses, wasn't that recent. I took off the addresses, the mail addresses, and I wrote off to the organizations, and they all came back saying, basically, we can't help you until you're 18 years old and you've got plenty of time. So now fast forward, I'm in my early 20s, still looking for my family, still cannot find them. And at this point, I'm like, well, I'm just going to have to go out there and find out what I'm made of, because obviously they just disappeared off the face of the map, and I'm just going to have to go, push myself and see what I can do. And I've been very interested, after my adoptive mother had died when I was 19, to go off and do a lot of adventures that she never had the chance to do.
Can I can I pause you right there? Because there are like pieces of your story that I'm curious about. Like, what was that driving you to see what you said? I might as well go see what I'm made of. Like, where did that?
Well, I think that was because a couple different things. One is that I was the black sheep of the family, didn't fit in. So I'm like, where did I come from? I mean, I was always looking at people's faces to say, are you my mother? Are you my father? Are you, I wanted to have some kind of connection, because I kind of feel like I was just out there bopping out in the sea. And then the other thing is my parents were just, because my adopted parents knew I came from these kind of counterculture hippies in San Francisco at the time. And they were always afraid of them go off and drug and get knocked up and do drugs, and so they're always kind of treating me like I was like a little bit like this, you're this wild bad hippie, and I'm like, no, I don't think I'm a wild bad hippie, and so I didn't like that. It's like, no, I've got something in me, and it's valuable, and I know who I am, and I'm going to go out there and I'm just going to put it to the test and come back and let you all know. And then my adopted mother died when I was 19. And what happened was I was her caregiver for 5.5 months. So I was giving her 8 to 12 injections a day, cleaning out her colostomy, her foot-long incision. I mean, it's just, I became her sole caregiver 24/7. And her last words were, if you're ever going to do anything, do it now.
Wow.
And she died, but, and she was on her way we knew she had like maybe a week left, but the hospital accidentally laid her down flat during a sonogram, and she suffocated to death.
Oh my God.
And she was 54 years old, and she had been working her whole life to retire and start really living at 55.
Wow.
And I'm not doing that. I'm not making that mistake. And so I was like, I'm out of here. I'm going to go because you only got and it just like, boom, it was just like that, gone. Even though we were expecting her to die, it was like, but she didn't. She died because of a hospital mess up. And I never had a chance to say goodbye. And I love you. All the things that been kind of waiting to do, right? So I'm like, I'm not waiting for anything anymore ever again. And so I decided to go traveling around the world. And when I came back after traveling through 27 countries, 14 months, $10 a day budget, I totally had the adventure bug. And I had my adoptive grandparents who had been traveling for my whole childhood. And they're always bringing back little dolls from different countries. So I'd always play with these. I still have them. And I have all these dolls from around the country or around the world, I should say. And I just got enamored with them. Like, I want to go see this person, and I want to go see where this doll lives, you know? And then at that point in time, for whatever reason, when this is the unexplainable thing, right? I was absolutely driven to go out there and have an extraordinarily extreme cold weather adventure. I joined a South Pole expedition, started training with them.
Why the cold? This is why maybe this is why I imagined a buffalo.
I don't like the heat because there's so many damn bugs, but I don't do that. I don't know. It's right. That's a good question. Why the extreme cold? It was just so far off from my world, my reality, and that's a good question. It was the whole thing was like this driving force. Like, where did that come from? Like when I was like, hey, I'm going to the South Pole. They're like, what? Well, then I couldn't raise my money, so they went to the South Pole without me. And then it's like, fine, I'll put my own expedition together, but it'll be women only. We're skiing all the way across Antarctica. And I put together this American Women's Trans-Antarctic Expedition. And I get a woman named Anne Bancroft, another woman, Sue Gillard, these top Himalayan and Arctic adventurers on. And my friends and family are again like, what do you do? Because we didn't even go camping. We didn't do stuff in the snow. I mean, I just barely learned how to downhill ski. And they're like, where the heck is this coming from? I'm like, I don't know. And then when I put together this Trans-Antarctic expedition, 10 months later, like, Reinette, we've been doing this stuff for 15, 20 years. You're just starting to kick me off the team. And they went to the South Pole without me.
Oh, wow.
And I was very terribly depressed, really terribly depressed. And that was before I had enough life skills. And I almost didn't make it. I was like really suicidal. I'm like, why bother living and pursuing dreams if people are going to steal your dreams like that? I mean, that's just horrific. And especially women doing this to other women, right? I'm like, I'm all about sisterhood, man. And it took me a year to come out of that. And I finally came out of that. When I did, I'm like, wait a second. When you started this, you didn't even know how to ski. You didn't know how to mountaineer. You didn't know a Z pulley compared to a C pulley. You didn't know, you weren't an EMT. I became an emergency medical technician in case anybody was injured. I had climbed McKinley by that time and Rainier and Kilimanjaro, and I did all these other adventures. And I'm like, and that was just in a matter of just a few years. And I'm like, just go find something to cross. Just go cross something. You don't need base camp managers. You don't need corporate sponsorships. You don't need teams. Just go do it yourself. So that's when I decided to go across Alaska. And then at that point in time, the family was just like, what in the world are you doing? And I was so driven. That's all I can say. It was this, I had to do this. I was driven. And I had every excuse, Elisha, in the book to give up. I had plenty of reasons along the way to the day, like right up before I was to leave for my actual journey across Alaska by myself. I had plenty of excuses not to do it, not to even start. Long story short, I get a camera from National Geographic. I start February 14th, 1994. 5 days before I'm to leave, I have these 2 dogs I've been training with. One reason why I'm saying, I had every excuse to quit before starting. And I was up in Alaska and I commercial fished for 6 months to see if I was tough enough to do this. Because if I wasn't tough enough to commercial fish, I wasn't tough enough to cross Alaska. And ultimately, I ended up ready to leave. I had 2 dogs I've been training with. There's an Iditarod sled dog racer who would let me his dogs. And I've been training with them 5 days a week, skiing 12 to 25 miles a day. I was going to attach them to my waist, help me pull my 160-pound sled behind me. And 5 days before I'm to leave, he says, I don't think you can do it. In fact, I think you're going to die before you make the first 100 miles. And I'm taking the dogs back. And it was just like, what? And he knew that if I did not have dogs, obviously, who's going to pull the sleds? And I'm not going to go. Well, then 5 days later at 55 below, I'm pulling the sled by myself down the frozen Yukon River. So we're going to fast forward. I get a dog along the way named Diamond, who was going to be shot and killed that spring because he was not fast enough sled puller by a dog musher, not Eagle, Alaska. But oh my goodness, I'm blanking on the next village I went to. It'll come to me. That's just Circle, Alaska. And I said, I can take the cold. It was 55 below, and really, I almost froze to death. In fact, my third night out, I actually did leave my body because it was 55 below, and I was sopping wet. And I'm kind of shocked. I survived that.
Can I pause you again? Just because I feel like there are so many like gems out of your story that will perhaps help my audience. A lot of a lot of people listening to me struggle with chronic pain or autoimmune conditions, or they have childhood traumas that they feel are stuck in their body, and they don't, and they want freedom, but a lot of the time, again, it's like, I want freedom from this experience. Yeah. And as you tell this story, what I'm curious about, or to get your thoughts on, and I have heard you tell this story, but so I know things my audience doesn't yet, but so you're describing, like, first of all, this is not like, most people wouldn't choose to go through this experience. So obviously there's something driving you. And as we were kind of talking about earlier, there's just some tuning fork of the true path. And for whatever reason, it was the true path for you. And I have a philosophy that, or a theory, maybe you could say, that when we choose risks voluntarily with our whole being, we choose to move towards something and take all the risks that come at us on the way to that something. And there's no part of us that's actually like resisting it. It creates some kind of protection we wouldn't otherwise have, because if we are actually resisting the experiences we're having, it's worse. It's far worse. I mean, you couldn't, I know I haven't done what you've done, but I climbed some mountains here in Colorado, nothing like you've done. But I have my own version of it, and everybody does, which is why I want to pull out these gems from your story, because if you were out there in 55 degree below weather and you start resisting and resenting the cold and this is a really hard thing, I think, for people to understand. There's a difference between resisting painful experiences and feeling it fully, because you could be out there swearing like, fuck, it's so fucking cold,
A lot of
but that doesn't mean you're resisting it.
No.
You're being with it. You're dancing with it. You're letting it be cold. Right. So I'm curious if you've ever, because you might have died, but I feel like somebody else might have who would have resisted that experience.
Right. So, I think it's important that, when this stuff happens, you just like let yourself feel it, right? Just like let it out, feel it, and I was feeling it. Like the first stage, you may or may not know, was when I was on the bank of the frozen Yukon River, 40 below, and was not going to really start till the next day. But I just had landed in a little mail plane in Eagle, Alaska, on the Canadian-Alaskan border. And it's important to feel it. And then it's important to like learn how to work your way through it. And I don't know really exactly where I learned to work my way through it. But when I was standing on this, it's really important when you're talking about like, when you're in pain and stuff and trying to heal. Oh, actually, I take this back. I do know where I got this one from. A woman, before I left to travel when I was young, when I was 19, around the world, and I never left my home before. So, traveling off around the world by myself and with a female friend was like really adventurous. I'd asked her, she was like a psychic. I said, and a dear friend, I said, can you give me some advice, like how to make sure I stay out of trouble? And because this is what I suggest you do, is that when you're getting ready to go on a plane, let's say to fly to New York, you imagine yourself getting to the airport, going in, waiting to boarding, plane taking off, flying, landing, and you getting to your destination. If you cannot see yourself at your destination, then you don't do it. Well, that's like easy to say, but like, let's say you're getting on the plane and all of a sudden you're not seeing yourself getting to your destination. Are you going to get off the plane? Depends on how much you trust your intuition. And so I did that over and over and over and over, traveling around the world. And after a while, I just thought, I don't think it even works, because so now I'm in South Africa at the height of apartheid in 1987, and I'm hitchhiking 900 miles from Cape Town to Johannesburg, and I see myself, getting on train or cars and trucks and blah, 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 but I don't see myself getting to Johannesburg. And I still go anyway. I hitchhike anyway. Long story short, I ended up having to break a truck driver's nose to get out of the situation that I was in. We'll just leave it at that. And I was unharmed. But he was not unharmed. And I was like, next time you need to listen to your intuition. So from that point on, I really would listen to it. And so that was a practice I just developed all the time. And I do it to this day. So when I was standing on the banks of the frozen Yukon River, I looked down the river and I waited till February because I wanted the ice to be really thick. And my biggest fear was breaking through the ice, falling, being rushed under the ice, and then, suffocating to death. That was my fear. And so I arrive, and the first thing I see down the river is this gigantic, huge, gaping hole in the ice. And I was like, whoa! Those like landmines. You don't see them until you're like breaking through it. And I was like, no. And so I started to cry. And then as I started to cry, my eyelids start to freeze together. I'm like, I can't even cry, and I'm just over. And I only have like $15 to my name. So I don't even have the money to fly out of the situation if I wanted to. The only way out. And sometimes I will do that where I'll kind of back myself into a corner to force me to do something. Like, you've got no other option. So I started thinking, okay, this is point A. We know point B is way, 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 way down there, all the way on the other side of Alaska. Okay, just to get going, what do you need to do right now? I'm like, I need to make dinner. Okay, I can do that. Then I have to, erect my tent. I can do that. Go to sleep. I've been doing that. In the morning, make breakfast, break camp. Okay, no big deal. I've done that. Ski. I've been skiing. I'm fit as a fiddle. Do all that. And I said, okay, the next day you do the exact same thing. And then the next day you do the same thing. And the next day, okay. And the next day, until finally I could see myself on the other side of Alaska looking back. And I could feel it, feel the excitement. I could see it. And so that to me is like when you're talking about healing yourself, what you've got to see yourself healed looking back going, damn it, I did it.
Yeah.
And the other thing I used to do too is when I was skiing, before I got a dog, because I was skiing for the first 200 miles without a dog until I got to the village of Circle, where I did get a dog to help me pull my sled. I remember when I was skiing in the very beginning, the snow was so dry because it was so cold that the sled runners were actually sticking to the snow. It was like Velcro on Velcro is what it felt like. And I didn't know it until right before I got there. But, frozen rivers don't freeze flat. They freeze concave. So there's really two areas that are safe to ski in the frozen rivers, like the dead center, which is like the old jumbled ice. And it's like you got icebergs everywhere. So you're just doing this all day long,
Wow.
So I wanted a straight shot, which is on the side, but the side's like this. So I'm skiing like this while my sled's wanting to go that way, and I'm skiing. So as this was happening, my eyelashes froze off and broke off, snapped off, and in no time I had 30 blisters. I always had 15 blisters. They're just equal, both feet. And so I had all these blisters, and it was really painful, actually, and it was really exhausting, and I was shocked because I was really fit as a fiddle. I mean, I'd trained myself, and I was really ready to go, and I was like, holy cow, I wasn't expecting this. And so it started to do a number on me mentally. And so what I started to do was at the right times of the day as I was skiing, the sun would be behind me, and I would see my shadow in front of me on the snow. And I look at that, and that thing is perfect. It's powerful. It can do anything. I would focus on that shadow. And I just look how strong it was and robust, and look at the speed, smoothness and the accuracy. And I would focus on that, and I wouldn't feel my blisters anymore.
Wow.
Then the other thing that was also transformative too, which also ultimately got me into more community work, was because of that experience. I was, you're thinking a lot about yourself. Oh, this is so difficult. Oh, me. Oh, ouch. Oh, when I got to Circle, I realized I need a dog, not because it was really because of the loneliness. It's like the colder it gets, the more lonely it gets. And the colder it gets, the more it does a number on your mind. I mean, I knew that was going to happen, and it was fascinating what I experienced in the extreme cold. But I was like, I need a dog. I need a companion, actually. It's because it's really I mean, like, the wind doesn't even blow. The water wasn't even flowing. It was frozen. There's no stir. There's animal. I mean, some wolves here and there, but it's like no animals. I mean, it was just like everything was just, and it's just like the silence was deafening, right? I mean, you just felt like you were the only person left on the planet. Well, once I got this dog named Diamond, for this trapper who said, I'm going to be shooting and killing 3 dogs. You can have one or all of them. I took the one named Diamond. As soon as I had him, attached to my leash, we had to train for a couple of weeks. Good enough. it transformed everything, because all of a sudden it was like, well, of course I'm going to make it. I've got to make it. How do I mean, what would happen to Diamond? If I don't make it, the wolves would eat him. I'm like, of course. So all of a sudden, it didn't matter if I had blisters on my feet. It didn't matter if I was exhausted and my feet were swelling and my toenails were going off. It didn't matter. It's like, if I don't do this, Diamond is dead. And so it transformed everything. Get myself off my mind, off myself, I should say. And that transformed everything.
I think that is such a perfect literal metaphor for how to heal. Because if I get my mind off me and help heal something else or care for something else, then I'll actually be healed in that process of experience.
Yeah, we're definitely more susceptible to self-sacrifice, right? Like, I'll just sacrifice myself. It's just me. Blah blah blah. But when it's something else, and I've always been that way. I mean, I've never been one for so much self-care, and I've been working at it more and more. And I can usually only do it in the wintertime when things slow down. But when you have something else to think about, it just makes you like, of course, the determinations, of course, I can't let that person down. I can't let them suffer. I can't let this happen because of me not following through on this.
So, I mean, this is something that I definitely is going to be a theme of the Human Freedom Project, both my Substack and the podcast, which is, in my opinion, we have to get out of our self-absorbed, self-victimizing mindsets. And this is, I still want you to finish your story, so we're going to come back to that. But maybe you could speak on that for a minute, because it's kind of coming up organically. You were adopted. That must have caused some pain, Right. And not. I guess I'm curious to get your take on the we're like indulging in victimhood now. I mean, I have a lot of trauma in my history, and I've always hated the word victim. I don't even use the word survivor. I think I maybe took for granted that I went to a Waldorf school growing up, which instills imagination in children. And my imagination saved my life because I could imagine why this was all happening. And I believe in reincarnation. And I could imagine, maybe even what caused the person who violated me when I was 13 to become who he was. And there was good in him. And it wasn't just... So imagination is so powerful for that, which you've been talking about, visualizing and then feeling with our tuning fork what we imagine. And when they align, that's truth.
I had to stress that too. I mean, I think one of the reasons why I've been very productive when I am determined to do something is I get very passionate about it. I feel it, I emote it, and people can sense that. And it's like you said, a tuning fork. They're like, "Ooh, I love that."
Yeah.
And so it's not just you're just visualizing. Okay, I see it. It's like no. There's got to be like this, like, I got to do it. And that passion is absolutely contagious, especially to the right people.
Yep. Yeah. So, but it almost sounds to me like you had to go find the pain because it wasn't just manifesting in your life. I don't.
Well, no, I mean, I had drama in my life. Trauma. Yeah, I had, both my adopted parents were alcoholics, and there was 9 years of sexual abuse. And then when my mother was sick, my dad got physically violent because he couldn't handle it. And, no, actually what that was is when this stuff was happening to me as a young child, especially when the abuse was happening, I would say to myself, they are not me. Their blood does not run through my veins. I am not this. I'm different. This is not who I am. This is not how I show up. And this is not part of my life. I don't allow that stuff in my life at all. I don't allow abuse in my life at all. And when things get abusive, even my community started to get abusive and nasty, and they were just like, and there's a lot of like whisper campaigns and things like that, because I've made a lot of enemies. You will make enemies when you speak the truth. That's the problem.
Definitely.
They'll go out there and they'll do things. And so, but I'm like, no, I don't allow abuse in my life. Like my partner, Susan, of 15 years, we're very respectful to each other. We love each other. We're kind to each other. We support each other. We're whatever you want, let me know. It's just like we want each other to be happy. And that's, that's from those lessons, of like, I'm not this is, baggage I'm leaving behind. And so that also spurred me to go look for my own family. Like, this is not me. Not that family, my natural family, isn't messed up, because I've uncovered things. Well, that sure is messed up. And they have their own set of baggage. Mm. So you can't really, you can't escape it.
No.
For me, what it's allowed though is where I don't feel like it's a victim. I don't feel a victim at all. I don't feel like I survived anything at all. What I feel like is that it has allowed me to really have a lot of compassion and empathy for people. It's really allows me to speak up for the voiceless. That's the other thing, is that because I have a strong voice and I've got a big personality, a lot of people don't. And my adoptive mother had taught me, if you ever want to be on the right side of history, make sure you always fight for the underdog. And so I'm always fighting for the misfits and the underdog, always, because they don't generally have a voice, and they're generally the ones who are being victimized and used and taken advantage of. And so, they were all valuable lessons. And ultimately, when I get to my Alaska trip, I saw these things these hardships as, a hand plane to wood, which I'll explain later, carving and shaping me as who I am, human being this day. Mm-hmm. And all of those terrible things, and all of them are really awful, but I wouldn't trade them for the world.
Me either. Isn't that wild? It's
it's maybe who I am. And I can recognize things and see things and key into things, because if I had not been victim to it, subjected to it, I would not even be in my awareness. I wouldn't even see it.
Yep. I completely agree. Yeah. I don't want to make this about me at all, but when I was 13, I had a 30-year-old man target me for grooming and spend 6 months grooming me. So the whole, the Biderman's coercion. Yeah. I know what that's like intimately. And then it was 2.5 years of doing whatever he wanted to me.
It's definitely a playbook. It's a playbook. It's psychological warfare to get you.
It's so crazy because somehow human beings have access to that knowledge without ever having read the document. It's like, it's somehow...
it's psychopathy.
Yeah.
That's what, that's what.
Yeah. But what's so amazing now is I can say, like you, and really mean it. I'm so grateful. I'm not, it's not to condone, and it's not to, things in their rightful place, but I wouldn't trade it, because it made me who I am, and I'm awake, and I know what those behaviors mean and what they lead to. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Well, can we get back to your story?
Well, of course. So, in a nutshell, I'm skiing down the Yukon River with my dog, Diamond. He's doing an amazing job pulling that sled with his heart. And I get halfway across, and all of a sudden the only path I knew, which was the frozen Yukon River, was melting ahead of schedule, like way ahead of schedule. And I was like, oh no. Now what do I do? Right. I have cross-country skis, not a motorboat. And so I stayed in an Athabascan native village called Stevens Village, just above the Arctic Circle. And while I was there, the Athabascans were nice enough to lend me a little cabin to live in right on the bank of the Yukon River. And this is the thing, is that this is where blind faith comes in, you guys, is that when you are, so many times this happened over and over and over again, and this is really important. If somebody said to me when I was ready to start on this journey to cross Alaska, okay, Reinette, in order for you to get from here to there, you're going to have to lose your eyelashes. You're going to lose all your fingernails, toenails. You're going to have to ski up to 60 miles a day. You're going to have to do this. You're going to have to do that. You get chased by a wolf pack. You're going to have to build a canoe. You're going to do this. Blah, 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 blah. I look at you like, are you nuts? I don't even know how to do that, and it's never going to happen. Yeah. Like, that's just not happening. But when time and time again, when I was faced with a challenge, I'd figure it out. Or this door that was not there at the beginning of the journey did not exist. Nowhere in my realm of reality, at the very moment that I needed to be taught by 2 trappers for 10 days, a trapper's boot camp, how to live at 55 below, the trappers would just be right there. I spent 10 days with them. If I needed to go out and Fine, like, okay, now I'm at a crossroads. The river's, breaking down. The ice is breaking down. What do? I give up, or I find another way to continue? There's no other option. So I stay in this little cabin, and I'm going in and out of my door going, what do I do? What do I do? I have no options. I see this little green thing sticking out of the snowbank that's melting every day. And finally, I'm like, what is this? So I dig this thing out. I pull out the last canoe built in this village 20 years before. And I look at that. And it's dilapidated. You can't use it, right? But I look at that and I think, that's what I'll do. I'll build myself a canoe. While I was there, because I knew I was going to be there for quite many, many weeks, to wait really for the river to break down and actually clear out, I wanted to learn a skill. I thought, I'll make a pair of mucklucks. I might do some bead work. I'm like, no, I'll build a canoe. So this is that moment then that I go around to all the elders and say, I'm going to build a canoe. Hey, I'm going to build a canoe. Can I borrow some tools? Yeah, I'm going to build a canoe. I just need some tools. Show me what kind of trees to cut down. And I got my example right there. I know what the end result should look like. That's all I need, right? I'll get there. I never built a birdhouse, right? But I'll get there. So then word gets back to me that, from the villagers that, women don't build canoes. We just don't do that. I was like, oh, no. So I go back to all the elders and say, no, you don't understand. Where I come from in California, that's what women do. We're canoe builders. That's our thing. They couldn't Google that back then, right? California women canoe builders. They couldn't Google that. So they lent me the tools. And I do apologize because I've now had conversations with my Indigenous friends and they're like, why didn't you listen to the elders? They told you women don't build canoes. And that's actually, that was really disrespectful. I actually have to apologize, saying it was a lesson I learned only like a couple of years ago. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I didn't even think that. I said, the perspective I was seeing it was like, oh, you're a chick. This is a man's, culture, male dominant culture. And women can't do that. You don't have the ability to do that. Well, yes, I do. Just give me the tools. So I didn't see it coming from the Indigenous perspective. I saw it from the woman in a man's world, like, you don't have the ability to do this, because that's what I've been buttoned up against for years. So I apologize to the Indigenous people. So they lend me the tools. I go out with my 3 favorite Athabascan friends. They tell me what kind of trees to cut down. I cut down 3 trees. And then, of course, I'm getting ready. I'm splitting the wood with a hatchet, and ripping it 18-foot long planks. I'm going to make these beautiful ribs. I'm going to hand plane them down. And then Herb, a big-bellied Athabascan who'd been volunteered by the elders to come and sit with me. So we're sitting on the log that will become my logs. They'll become my boat. And he says to me, we call you Wonder Woman because of all the miles you can ski in a day. But you build this canoe, and we're going to call you Fruitcake. So I rip those 18 long planks of wood 5 days a week, 5 hours a day, just like a little job. I'm hand planing, and they're walking by going, Fruitcake. And the kids are going, Fruitcake, the adults. And after 2.5 weeks, I'd hand plane these beautiful, thin, 18-foot long planks of wood, submerged them in the local muskrat pond as they told me what to do. And I was just kind of making shit up as I go. I'm like, oh, I think that's how this works, And it was during that time as I'm hand planing that I started, because, you're just sitting there at the banks of the river waiting for the river to break up where things are flowing. And you just got all this time to reflect, right? And I started realizing, whoa, this hand plane was all those troubles in my life, all those difficult challenges in my life, right? And it just kept planing me and preparing me for this moment, right? But I never think of those type of challenges as a hand planing shaping you as a human, as this beautiful vessel that can go places. And that's why I realized that all these terrible things that had happened to me was actually, no, that's how you got here, was because of all that. Yeah. That's what gave you the ability to make this canoe. And so after 2.5 weeks, I take all the planks of wood that was in the muskrat pond. I lay them in my feet. I got like this much, enough for 2 canoes, because I thought I was going to be breaking, a lot of the wood. I didn't, but I thought I would. And also I see this beautiful glimpse into humanity, and now I'm ready to assemble. I start to assemble, and all of a sudden, the locals, the Athabascans, stop going, Fruitcake, and instead they start coming up saying, I got a C-clamp if you need a C-clamp for that. And then someone else came saying, I've got some galvanized screws if you need some. And someone else came and said, I got some oil-based marine paint. You like blue and red. So my point is this. None of that stuff existed before. None of that. The screws didn't exist. The C-clamp didn't exist. The check I got from a friend who just sent me $50, enough to order from Fairbanks canvas to put on the canoe, did not exist. The oil-based marine paint that I didn't even know I needed that did not exist. And I was so impassioned. I was so determined. I could so see myself. I was so emanating that energy that when I began to bring that into the physical, the same people with that same tuning fork, that same vibration were like, I want to be a part of this. I want to do this with you. I want to go on this journey. Please let my screws go with you. And so my point is that that's blind faith. Many times I'll go off and I'm like, I'm going to go do this. And people are like, you don't know how to go do that. You've never done that before. I'm like, I know. But as long as I take another step and another step and another step, at some point my nose will hit a door, and this door will open that's not available to me 2 miles back. But when I get here, it will be available, because life is like, oh, you made it this far. Congratulations. Here you go. You now go through. And so
it's so beautiful, Reinette. I have had, you don't
know it unless you experience it. And now I just want to say to people, like, look, I expect that to happen now. It's not like, well, I hope it happens. It's like, no, it just happens. I know that when I dedicate myself and I put myself, doors will open that I can't even see right now. And that's just as blind faith. And so when it arrives, however, because it does arrive like almost daily, I'm still in awe of it. Mm-hmm. I'm in complete awe of it. Like, wow.
Me too. It's so.
Long story short, so then I paddled that canoe, averaging 75 miles a day without very little current. I averaged 50,000 strokes a day. I actually did a calculation and counted, because I had nothing better to do. and I covered 900 miles in 11 days on the water. And that was in 1894. And then 2 years later, again, how world would have it.
1994?
This is 1994.
I think, you said 1894, which I know you're going to say in a minute, in a few minutes.
Oh, God, that was maybe it was both times. So there may have been a slip, who knows. So 1994. So then 2 years later, I'm now 30. I'm like, okay, now I'm going to find, I don't care what it takes. I'm going to find my family. And I had spent like the majority of my life looking for my mother. I could not find her. And now I'm like, my 30th birthday, this is going to be my gift to myself. So I finally find my mother, and I find out my real name is Marcella Funston. I'm like, never had a chance of ever having a normal name. And my mom's name was Jane Funston. And when she died, being the good hippie she was, she died and her name was Istara Yadlowski. I was like, oh, no wonder why I couldn't find you. My adopted mother, before she died, had told me my last name was Anderson. So for 20 years, I was looking for the Andersons. I mean, it was just like, again, life was like, no, not ready to open that door. Nope, can't open. Nope, not going to open the door yet. You have got to go through this, and that. And when you do, then the door will open. And I won't tell you the finale of the story. You have to watch my Alaska show.
I will.
But it's so emblematic of what I'm talking about, what we're talking about, and we're speaking to. But so I find my natural mother, and I found when I was around 11 years old, she was sick with breast cancer and died a year later at the age of 5. And I'd be like 11, 12 years old. Didn't know this, so I kept looking. And but I found out that she had this really wild grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, a General Frederick Funston. If you're in San Francisco, there's a Fort Funston and a Funston Avenue, and he's known as the guy who saved San Francisco in the 1906 earthquake. He was a general in charge of the Presidio. He's the one who declared martial law, did the big, huge fire break, very controversial, but he saved a huge chunk of San Francisco. And so I also found out I had a natural half-brother, 4.5 years younger than me. We had the same mom, Jane. And I'm talking to him in East Japan, working as a journalist. And I'm telling him about my Alaska trip. And he says to me, no, when you crossed Alaska, that was after you found out a great-grandfather did that. And I was like, no, you're confused. I said, I'm talking about a trek across Alaska that I did. I think you're mixed up. He's like, no. The Smithsonian Magazine, May 89 edition, did a story on his life, and they included this journey he had across Alaska. He'd been hired by the USDA to go up to Alaska, collect botanical samples, and see what the heck was up there. He was going the furthest north of any white man at that time in Alaska, right? He was actually going out there and exploring beyond any other white guy. And so I was like, what? And so I'm in LA at the time. Within a half hour of getting off of that phone conversation, this was like in 96, so the internet was not really, full-fledged yet. I went right up to UCLA, got into their library, got a hold of the Smithsonian Magazine, had it in my hand, And my mind was blown. And I see that, he started his trip as 2 years total because he did not have the luxury of flying in like I did to the headwaters. And I started a little bit further down from right below the headwaters. But he started his journey on April 10th. I was like, my birthday, what a coincidence. And then I continued to read, and he had traveled 1,500 miles total down the Yukon River. I was like, wow, I did 1,500 miles too. That's crazy. And then he snowshoed down the frozen Yukon River. And along the way, he shot and killed a sled dog to eat because he was starving. And I'm like, that's crazy because I actually skied down the Yukon River, and I also saved a sled dog from being shot and killed. And, he became my companion and helped me pull my sled. And then my great-grandfather with 2 buddies cut down 3 trees and built an 18-foot long canoe. And I'd cut down 3 trees, and I'd built an 18-foot long canoe. And then I paddled mine down the rest of the river, and I put little stabilizers on my boat. Well, he paddled down the river with his, botanical samples in the delta, which is like the ocean by the Bering Sea. He turned his boat, lost a lot of botanical samples and photographs, not all, but a lot. Well, of course, I didn't because I had my stabilizers, and which saved my life on 2 occasions. Actually, saved my life. And he did his trip in 1894, and I did my trip in 1994. And he was 27 and turned 28 along the way. And I was 27 and I turned 28 along the way. And I'm thinking to myself, this is mathematically impossible. I didn't even know my name. I never heard of that man, didn't know anything about him. There was like nothing. It was like, this is not even math. How is this even possible? Because it's not even like, I went out there and did the same thing. It was like, cha-chink, 1894, 1994, same age, same distance, same boat, same, I didn't kill a dog and eat it. I actually saved it. But it was just like, what just happened? And that changed everything. And so then I was like, okay, who's Fred Funston? Who's this guy? 5'4", barely 100 pounds, was a highest-ranked military official in the country, had Patton, Pershing, Dwight D. Eisenhower, MacArthur under his command. He was overseeing Pershing as he hadn't pursued Pancho Villa along the Mexican-American border when he's ready to lead us into World War I, the Great War. And he dropped dead of a massive heart attack at the age of 52, and Pershing took his place. And so I was like, okay, I got to check into Fred. So I check into Fred. I started learning about Fred. And I take cues from Fred. I learn a lot from Fred. I learn a lot from his life, what he does, which is phenomenal, where he messed up, his tactics. I see total similarities. I mean, there's things that I see in him where I'm like, okay, it's just in my DNA. I just have to accept this. He's loud, and so it really has opened me up to like just being much more accepting of myself. Like, oh, that's where that comes from. I'm like, that's my genes, and I use him as a roadmap for me in many ways. And it also allows me much more accepting of who I am as a human being. And so that's just like in a nutshell. There's actually much more to this.
I believe it. It's such a crazy story. It's so cool. And just to tie it all back together, where we started talking about the tuning fork and the true path. And if you're willing to walk that true path with blind faith and walk through the doors that appear in front of you, not knowing what's even behind them, because you don't. And sometimes it's painful experiences, and sometimes it's really, they're wonderful experiences, but you just keep walking.
It's generally never what you think it's going to be, too.
No, you did not plan it.
That preconceived notion of like how it's going to go. It's like, no. And that's where you're like, don't fight it.
Yes.
Right. When you fight it, you have expectations and you got to let go of them because you're vibrating, right? And by you going, no, this is how's that to be? It's like you're putting your hand on that tuning fork and you're just killing it. You're just like, ugh.
Yes. It's attachment.
Like, let it do this. Just, it's, filling away that way. And there was very much a lot. And even to this day, that still kind of goes on. And it's hard to explain my style of leadership or how I show up because like, it's not like a lot of people. It's like, I don't operate the way everybody else operates.
Thank God. It's paradoxical because, this is something I work with people in pain a lot, like they're attached to not being in pain. I'm like, it's your attachment to not being in pain that's actually keeping you in pain. And it's ironic, I don't know if you have any other insight from your experience of that. I think you're kind of hitting upon it, which is like you're trying to actually tackle the pain, but you got to tackle like, well, what's the root of it? It's like, and how do you go beyond it? So it's not like you're even having to fight it and you're wrestling it and you're throwing it to the ground. It's like, no. I'm just going to checkmate it.
and I'm going to go over here and focus on this and just let that just kind of, go away, wash away. And I definitely had, a lot of that. Even on the journey, I had a lot of that, like, oh, this hurts. And then I just focus on something else.
Yeah, I guess maybe what I'm seeing, like a parallel with a lot of what I teach and some of my stories, you were aiming at something.
Yeah.
Aiming at something transcendent, maybe, or maybe you weren't even sure what you were aiming at, but but you were aiming at, I want to know my family, and then you tried that, and then you let go of attachment.
Yeah, I let go. Well, that's just, I let go. Like, obviously, I'm never going to find them.
Yep.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define myself. Who am I? Because that's obviously whoever I am is who my family is.
Okay, so what are your thoughts on the, like, you're a very spiritual person. You say this.
Yeah.
Where does that come from? And like, I think this is so important because when I look out right now, the people that I either know personally or that I kind of listen to online or whatever, who don't have a spiritual anchor, like a spiritual context in which to put themselves in the world, are suffering the most.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious just to have you speak to that in relation to both your story and then also, like, maybe this will be a good segue into the state of the world and how we confront it. But yeah,
Well, I mean, no pain, no gain. I think there's actually something to that. And what we're going through right now is spiritual warfare. This is good against evil for sure. And I also think we're being tested. Like, I was going out there and throwing myself into the test. And we are being tested as spiritual being, as a humanity. We are being completely tested. We're sentient beings. And I think we've kind of lost track of that and connection with that. And so, for me, I'm like, oh, we're just being tested. Oh, and I go back to this. If it had not been for things going wrong, if it had not been things going not as according to plan, if I had not been challenged by things and pushed to the limit, I would not know I could ski 60 miles in a day. I would not know I could paddle 75 miles a day. I would not know that I could build a canoe. I would not know that, I wouldn't know what blind faith. None of that would have occurred without the hardship.
Yep.
And we are being so challenged because we are so off track. And the more off track you are, the bigger the challenge is. But that's why you don't run from the challenge. You face them because it's really what it is. It's like life, the universe is trying to recalibrate you. And the further you are off, the more it's going to be like, boom, upside the face. You're like, whoa, well, let me go over here now. And that's what's happening. So if you don't have some kind of faith, if you don't have a belief in this, spirit, a creator, to understand like, oh, I'm being challenged. You know why? Because I can do a lot better than this. I can do a hell of a lot better than this. And that's what's going on. So, I try to let people know, like, hey, this is what's going on. These are the challenges you're facing, which is like a wake-up call. Here's red flags, like, hello. This is the stuff that's shifting. And in order for you to be able to, maintain some semblance of being able to feed yourself and provide this and that and survive in these changing worlds, you have to be aware of this. But in the meantime, this is the challenge. This is the opportunity. This is falling apart, giving you space to build here, to create here, new industries, new skills, new friends, new networks, new thinking, new paradigm. Can happen with this still in place. It's got to crumble. If I had a frozen Yukon River when I was at Stevens Village instead of a cracking, breaking road, I would have continued skiing. But because the only road I knew was disappearing fast, I had to shift accordingly. And I was like, holy shit, look what I can do.
Yep.
And I'm like, would I ever want that to have gone a different way? Nope. That just went perfectly. Thank you so much for that incredible lesson.
Yeah. So I have a saying, I love these Colorado mountains. I've climbed about, I think like 35 unique ones. And then,
amazing.
Yeah. But I always say, how you climb a mountain is how you do life. And it's such...
Well, there's many different paths to the same mountaintop, right? It's like we're all doing our own thing. Like even those who have chosen, let's say, to go out the COVID route or the vaccine route. Okay, this is your path. We're all essentially heading to the same mountain, which I believe is probably enlightenment, right?
Yeah.
But I'm, I can't force you. It's just like you can't force me on my path. I can't force you. I'll do what I can to inform you, give you whatever information and tools, hints, guidance, and then you're carving your own path.
Okay, well, I'd love to know, let's segue into that broader picture of state of the world, your work, what you're working on. You're working on so many important things, or at least that I care about, and I'm so grateful for you shining a light on them and getting boots on the ground to actually do work, not just talk about it. What are you? I guess what I'm curious is, like, what are you aiming at right now?
Right.
And then what do you see as the current obstacles on that path? Like that, the things that you can actually point to.
Right.
Right.
Well, I mean, so I've got a Substack, which is, they say it's an online newsletter, which I don't really think it encompasses what it really is. But I do interviews like what you're doing here, and I do articles and self-reflections and things like that. And it's it's Reinette Senum's Foghorn Express Substack.com.
Yeah, we'll leave all the links.
Okay, fantastic. And so really what I'm trying to do is blow out information people may not be familiar with, or kind of connect the dots, give them an overview and say, okay, this is what's going on. This is what counters it. This is what's going on. This is what you need to know, or what you can do about it. Or many times it's just a different perspective. Yeah, this is going on, but this is why. It's a spiritual war. And yeah, it's terrible, but in order for this to happen, that's got to go down. So, because really what I'm seeing is, this is the battle between good and evil. And it's like, really, we are waking up so quickly. And yes, there's millions and millions of people who they're never going to wake up. And that's their soul journey. But there is a lot of people who have been sitting on the fence for a long, long time, some for decades, some for the last 3 years. And those individuals who are sitting on the fence, I've never seen any of them go to the other side. They're all just falling over to this side, which is they realize that it's not even a corrupt government. It's a corporation masquerading as a government is what we realize. We don't even have government. It was hijacked over 100 years ago. But we're seeing the corruption. We're seeing the darkness. We're seeing the evilness of it all. The Satanism. It's very satanic, and it's coming to a head. We're actually seeing it. So what I'm trying to do is wake people up a little bit faster who are on that fence, who are falling off that fence, who are realizing, and trying to wake them up, because we are going to have great changes before us. They're already happening, and those shifts are going to happen. So the more that I can imbue, okay, psychologically, emotionally, mentally, this is what you prepare for. This is what you can do. Holding potlucks, building up your tribe, your group of people, doing this, doing that, just to kind of help buffer the landing, essentially, right? And just to get people ahead of the curve, because generally I'm ahead of the curve, and that's just because I'm a tuning fork, right? I'll send something and I can't even really figure out why am I feeling this. I'm like, yeah, but this is what's going on.
Okay, so I'm going to pause us on the bigger picture for a minute and then try to zoom in, because one thing I've noticed on a lot of podcasts or YouTube shows or whatever that are trying to, speak truth and get truth out there is that they will often, both people will talk about it because they both know. And the audience may not, and they're listening to two people kind of talk about things that they, like you and I are filling in the blanks. Like you could say Rockefellers and I instantly, boom, I fill in the blanks. Or you say, the government is basically a corporation masquerading as a government, and boom, I can fill in the blanks. But I'd love to pick something to zoom in on if we imagine that maybe somebody or a lot of somebody's, hopefully actually, are listening to this. And don't know, what should we shine? What do you think is the most important thing to shine a light on for people who are just starting to knock on the door, of the state of the world? Like what?
Well, I mean, I guess I'd have to say is that it is a very, very old war. And I do say it's Babylonian, and there's a lot of folks out there who've been speaking to, the Khazarian mafia, which is kind of Ukrainian, and the Khazarians come from Babylon, and they're extraordinary imposters, and they've had hundreds, thousands of years of going out and usurping people's identity and then stealing their power, their positions, and so on. And they're the power brokers. They're the bankers today. They're the very, very powerful people who've been around for a long time, kind of masquerading as, oh, we're here as the World Health Organization. Oh, we're here as the World Economic Forum. And, we're here as, to serve humankind. And they're not. They're actually vampires, essentially. They're parasites is really how I relate it to. And so we live in a very parasitic society. And this is an old thing that is really coming to the surface. We're seeing it. And all of the buffers, all the stories, all the narration, all the agencies and different groups that we think are disparate and separate have actually all been there to create a certain narrative and a belief system. And what's happening is we're seeing the belief system just absolutely crumble. We're seeing everything just blow up and crack open. And we're starting to realize what the education system really is. We're starting to understand what social media and television and Hollywood really is, and the music industry really is, and the prison system really is, and what the government really is, and the public health department in your county, what it really is. And all of a sudden you're like, well, wait a second, this isn't what I was expecting. And so that's when I go, we were talking in the beginning, like, I built my identity within this framework. And if I question this framework and this framework has come crashing down, well, what does that mean for who I am and how people see me and in my reputation and so on. So I try to tell people, like, look at you, it has to crash and burn, right? This road we're on has to dissolve and go away. Just like that river ice, it has to dissolve and go away so we can actually better ourselves and rebuild ourselves and recreate ourselves and refine ourselves and tap in even more. And so I just say to people, it's like, don't be afraid of what's happening in the world. Just use them as basically as cues. Like, oh, this is going on around the banking system. Okay, I got to tighten this up in my world. Oh, this is what's going on around the Food Network system. There's a cue. I've got to tighten this up in my world. Okay, there might be interruptions in the power grid. There might be interruptions, in the internet. Okay, I've got to tighten up my close-knit friends and make sure we've got communications and we're connected and we talk regularly. That's what it is. These are cues. These are essentially cues that you should be paying attention to say, okay, this is what it's telling me to do next. And so, we do that a lot. Like, we'll see something going on in the world where the banking system might be a little bit rocky. We're like, okay, we're going to ratchet this up and tighten that up a little bit more. Or might be communications are being really careful. We're getting make sure we have our two-way radios with all of our friends. We test them out with our big little antennas and, hey, can you hear me? Stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, it's just the world is telling us what direction to go in. It's telling us what we need to do, but most people don't pay attention to these as cues. They just see them as headlines in the paper, and they don't think it actually is connected to them anyway.
Yeah, like right now, I go to the grocery store and come home with a few things that cost what I could have gotten a whole cart full for, a couple years ago. But I actually know what's going on, and I know that most people don't. And even in our language, we use phrases like, oh God, like things are getting so expensive. No, our dollars are becoming worthless.
Valueless.
That's right. Yeah.
That's a big thing. Is like that dollar thing is huge. So I tell people, you got to get ready for the dollar to be valueless. That's why we started a time bank here in Nevada County in 2014. It was where you keep an accounting of your exchange, whether you're walking someone's dog or you're painting a door or doing construction work. And that time becomes its own set of values. So it might be you did an hour's worth of work. Okay, you get an hour's in your time bank account, or you did 15 minutes, you get 15 minutes, and then you can use that to go get guitar lessons or someone to drive you to the airport. And so that's, whoever thought of currency that way, but you can. But again, we were never trained that way. We're never taught that way. We think there's no other system but the current dollar fiat system. And that is, folks, if you are not preparing for the dollar to completely lose value, it's going to continue. We're already seeing the BRIC nations, right? We've got Brazil and Russia and India and so on, and China all leaving the dollar because they realize that, the dollar is basically like, hangman's, rope. And so we've got to prepare for that. So when I start seeing those things kind of elevate and big shifts happening like that, I'm like, okay, got to ratchet a little bit more. And it's not just like one big thing. One day you just get all your stuff together. It's a journey. It's one step at a time. You'll never, ever be complete. You can always, always, always improve yourself in this area. But one of the other big things I say to people is like, look at, stop. In America, we were really taught, I was as a young person, especially, if I'm independent, I can do whatever I want, I can take care of myself. It's like, yeah, no, not really. Because you're only living because there's farmers out there farming, and there's people bringing the pipeline to you, and there's people making the cars, and people who are behind the grocery, counter checking your groceries. We all need each other. And that's why I learned crossing Alaska. I was crossing it alone, but guess what? I didn't. People were giving me tools, they're giving me advice, they're giving me some gear, they were giving me fish, dried salmon. I mean, I was banking it as, oh, this is my solo winter crossing. But it's like, no, it was the village that got you across. Mm-hmm. And the sooner we see that, the better. So what we've been doing since the get-go of COVID is every Monday we have regular potlucks, pretty regular. And this is people who are like-minded, believed in the same things, as far as just like, we all have, freedom of speech, the right to have our opinion, bodily autonomy, and then we have diverse thought beyond that. And but we're there for each other. We know each other's skills. We know what we're good at, what we're not good at, what we have, what we don't have. We've actually even done like a SWOT analysis, which is knowing what your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are. Used to do that as a city council person with the city. We've done that as a group. Like, this is what we got going for us. Kind of weak here. Got to work on that. We got this covered. And so I really suggest not going it alone, like really building your tribe, and you do it really with a lot of joy and fun, which is you just go out there and you start having potlucks or picnics, at the local park, or barbecues where you just get to know your people. And when they hit hard times, like they're sick, like my partner just brought some soup to some of our friends who are, they're down and out. She brought them delicious, homemade, organic, bone broth soup for them to get better. And that's just what we do for each other. So you also don't feel like you've got to take it on all by yourself. Because if you want to overwhelm yourself really quickly, that's what you do. Is you think, I got to do it all. No, you don't. You can't.
So let's rewind for a moment, just because this will be the first time probably my audience is getting to know you. And I'd love the opportunity to do this again. And for them to get to know you better. And also I will definitely recommend your Substack and everything you're doing. But one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because you had this experience of being a mayor and being part of, maybe small community government, but it's still the government system nonetheless. And you were mayor of Nevada City when the COVID era began.
Right.
And I don't know that I want to go too much into it because you have told these stories other places, but just for my audience to know, I as the host of this podcast and with my mission with the Human Freedom Project is to shine a light on these 5 primary constraints of the body and relationships, which we've kind of been talking about, and then money and economics, and then the state and our environment. And I want to start pulling the threads, and it'll take many, probably hundreds of podcasts for people to start to get a full picture of how enmeshed these things are. Like, I have forever chemicals in my body, and you probably do too, because the government is in bed with corporations who, spray the skies and, spray the earth. And, my house is probably full of toxic chemicals that I'm just breathing in. And it's like, so everything, and then maybe even because of that, my organism is stressed. And then maybe I'm a little angry in my relationships, and I don't know, but it's just round and round it goes. It's just all of these things are enmeshed. And in my work with people in pain, what I have to do to help people break through of these chronic pain patterns is to help them put things in their rightful place. Because when things are enmeshed, we're sick. And that's what I see happening right now in our world. It's like all of these things have become so enmeshed that we don't even know what's what. We don't know what, where's up and down and left and right and truth and center. And we don't know because it's all just entangled. So, so you have experience in government, if we can call it that. In this, what I would call the state. So I guess this is a good opportunity for me to just say to my audience, but then also to you, I think perhaps there's a place for government if it were actually a government, which really should be limited to one primary thing, in my opinion, which is maintaining equal rights for people. And that's it. No enmeshment in the economic system, no regulation of education or professions or anything. which should be left to other spheres. And if we could untangle, then maybe we could start to heal. So what would you share with somebody who maybe is not aware of the corruption in our government system that you discovered in the last, few years for sure? And it sounds like you've been on the path though a lot longer.
Yeah. So when COVID hit, I was serving as a mayor for the second time. I'd been on city council for 8 years and I just won my third election. And so by that time I was very familiar. Now also I go down to Sacramento and I testify against stupid bills, which is a lot of those around 5G and so on and other stuff, and bodily autonomy stuff. But so when COVID hit, I was very aware of it in January before most people were. I was starting to kind of warn people like, hey, there's this weird thing called COVID, coronavirus. What do we do? You should know about it. And long story short, when they had the first stay-at-home orders, I supported that because I'm like, we don't know what's going on. Let's be extra conservative, get a handle on this as long as the stay-at-home orders don't continue, which they did. And at that point in time, we went from being in-person meetings to on Zoom calls for city council meetings. And every Friday we'd have Zoom calls with the CEO of the county, right? Because the county's a corporation. It's a corporation. It's not a government. It's a corporation. The county supervisors, they're smoke and mirrors, essentially. They're just there to present as a government, but it's really the CEO who's the tail wagging the dog. Never more apparent than when COVID struck. And so we were meeting with the CEO, the county supervisor, chair, and the mayors and the managers of the cities to kind of get on the same page and so on. But then when I started to ask some questions, I'd be shut down by the CEO. She would either ignore me, mute me, or say, we're not asking too many questions, which is more than two. Wait till after everyone gets off and then we'll answer your questions. And then I just, get dogpiled afterwards. And so I started to see a shift within government. I've been in it long enough to know what's normal and what's not. And all of a sudden the county and the public health director, which by the way, in California and a lot of states around the United States, November 2019, legislation was passed that gave a county public health director unilateral power, right? This is a position that is not appointed. They're not elected. They are hired by county staff, which is basically a corporation. And they have power to shut down businesses, shut down schools, churches, force masks on people, stay-at-home orders, quarantine them, blah, blah, blah. This one person has all this power to do this to anybody. Well, in 2019, it didn't look as nefarious and it kind of got by most of us. But then once COVID struck and we look back, well, isn't this really fascinating? Because now you have all this power right before COVID hits. And so my point to this is what I ultimately learned, and this was it was actually in June of 2020. Now Newsom, governor of California, decided to do a statewide mask mandate. And he's like, boom, I'm King Newsom, and you're all putting a medical device on your face. And I'm like, well, no offense, but a governor does not have that unilateral power either. It's like you're not the king, and that's not how it works. And you can't force medical devices on every single person. And so I was looking around, waiting for people to speak out, waiting for all the elected officials to go, you can't do that. And it was dead silence. And so I went down to our police chief, Chad. I said, there's a statewide mask mandate. And what do you think about it? He goes, well, are you going to enforce it? And he goes, I don't know how I can enforce it. There's no penal code. If there's no penal code, I can't enforce it. I'm like, good point. He goes, and by the way, it doesn't look too constitutional. I'm like, thank you very much. Came back home, still silence around the state. I took a Peggy Hall, the Healthy American video, where she did a great job just describing how legislation is made, how bills are passed, how the process goes. And I posted up there saying, hey, basically, Governor Newsom is not king. He can't force this on you. Go around if you want to, breathe fresh air, call it a day. And all hell broke out. I mean, Sacramento Bee and San Francisco Chronicle, the LA Times, mayor saying, don't wear masks. I'm like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying a governor does not have the power to force that on your face. You still have the option. And all hell broke out. And I'm in a little tiny town. So as you can imagine, we have small staff and they're just in the crosshairs, getting the calls. We love her. We hate her. We love her. We hate her. And so that continued for some time. I just won my third election. And now it's July, and I realized, because there's very few people speaking up, I'm like, where is everybody? Like, where is everybody? It's like dead silence. Like, where is everybody? It's like everyone is in the fetal position. And so I realized that there's no way I'm going to shut up. I'm going to be even more controversial because I'm going to speak out even more. I'm going to start interviewing people and put information out that's clearly being censored. So on the 8th of July, I, instead of, stepping down as mayor and then reading my oath for a third time and taking my position as a council person again for the next 4 years, I read my resignation letter and I said to all my council members that, you have all the information that's available to me. It's available to you. It's very clear to me that you're all committing crimes against humanity. And, we're going to come back someday. We're going to hold your feet to the fire to the highest extent of the law. And that was highly controversial. And people got all pissed off. What are you talking about? You're crazy. And I said goodbye. And so, and then I started to really just keep calling things out and being steadfast. But it was very clear to me when COVID first struck that a new system was being put into place in the government. And the vehicle to do this, the vehicle to drive this and to control this and to enforce this was through the Health and Human Services. So the HHS. So every county, cities out there have, Health and Human Services. And essentially the health department, which I have to tell you, the health department in Germany was also the same mechanism that delivered the propaganda, the information, the laws, saying you're dirty, you're clean, you go here, you go there, same thing. And so pointing that out made a lot of people very, very uncomfortable. And they're still mad at me to this day. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not here to be your friend. I've been here to try to save your lives. And if you can't take the cues, then God bless you and I wish you the best. But I'm not here to, at this point in time, to make friends. I'm here to actually, do some damage control. And so that was when officially the whole U.S. government got completely hijacked by massive corporate and global interests to usurp all of the anatomy of the Constitution and human rights and basic rights as well.
Yeah, I remember reading something about this, and I don't actually remember what it was, but there was something about the health departments but also related then to other things. I remember reading it going, oh, this is what is it's it has a name. And I'm not.
You took fear appeal.
I don't know. No, I don't remember. But essentially, it was like, oh my God, this is the Trojan horse.
Yeah, it's a Trojan horse
because it's going to change, quote, government, but through the health departments. Not maybe COVID was maybe like the first test run or whatever, but other things as well, probably 5G and climate change and.
Well, and they've conditioned us now to bring in, climate change, which, by the way, I used to believe in, and I started nonprofits around it to combat climate change. And I'm like, oh, you fool! I was completely boondoggled, and so at least I admit to it, and I adjust, accordingly. But no, this is definitely conditioning. This is conditioning. People just fall in line.
And this is one of the reasons I'm so passionate about bringing knowledge of the body to people, because if we don't understand our own organism, then fear of illness and pain can be weaponized against us.
Oh yeah, it is
unweaponized against us.
100%. Yeah.
And I have no fear of pain anymore. I have no fear of illness. I have no fear of death. I have full faith in my organism and I'm willing to face whatever comes without that, fear knocking me off center. And, so yeah, thank you for pointing to that. I think that's the health issue
has been designed and is designed so you're not independent, you're not sovereign, you're not able to take care of yourself because, this is really huge. I say to people look it, if you're dependent upon the government for your food, for your retirement, for your housing, for whatever, it's a trap. And I know people don't want to hear this, it's especially if you're in the inner cities and scraping by. But I'm just saying. It's a trap. And the whole system has been designed for generations now to make you beholden to the government and to take away your ability to grow food, to, take care of yourself in your community and create your own energy and and be dependent upon a global system where you get your goods in China. And this is all by design. And so I say to people, really, they're like, what's my goal? What should I do? You want to disconnect from the parasitic system some point is going to completely extract the very life out of you. And you got to look at your own life saying, okay, where are my weak points? Where's the biggest risk and threat to my life?
Yeah. And I completely agree. And I guess the crossroads we're at and the what the last 3 years showed us is that there's one path we could choose, which is outsourcing authority over our health, over our money, over our, even relationships to a degree, because that's been so highly politicized now. We can outsource authority and responsibility to that over those things to someone else, to the government. But also, when I say that, I actually mean the state and corporations through health departments, through doctors, through, that have been indoctrinated into all this. So it's not just the state or the government, it's the corporate state employees, if you will, I guess.
A lot of them don't even know it, by the way, right?
I know.
They're like, I'm just doing my job. And they don't realize what part they're playing in that system. They have no idea. So when they hear this, like, you guys are full of shit. Yeah. It's like, you don't know. I mean, I have a dear friend who's a super sleuther. She's an incredible researcher, Kat, and she talked to a woman who was logging, and Kat's like, did you know that your logging company and the work you're doing is actually for Bill Gates to cut down beautiful, healthy forests, to sink them and, sink carbon? And she was like, what? She was just driving a logging truck. She didn't realize the part of the apparatus she was in. And I'm like, that's the perfect example of what we're talking about. You've got to follow the money. Most people they don't want to follow the money. Yeah. They just want their check and go home.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and the other path is responsibility for ourselves and sourcing authority from within. And there's really you could be in the middle. I don't see how you could be in the middle.
You got to make a choice. Later, you got to make a choice.
Yeah. And, this is why I wanted to talk to you, because choosing to be responsible for yourself, it's not easy. It's very hard, actually. It requires a lot of spiritual strength or fortitude and the willingness to accept the consequences of your own choices.
Right. You gotta learn, like, what does that mean exactly? To be more, what does that mean?
Yep. I wanted to ask you, probably getting close to wrapping up, but I wanted to ask you if you had ever heard, like, I feel like I've been able to trace a lot of what's going on sort of legally in this system to a clause in the Constitution that says Congress shall pass no law impairing the obligation of contracts. And a birth certificate is a contract, and social security number is a contract. And when you send your taxes in voluntarily, you're creating a contract. And corporations have contracts with the government and with themselves, and a trust is a contract. And many of the corporations are operating behind the scene, many layers behind, through trust agreements, which are contracts. Right. And it's just like, wow, this one little keyhole, pinhole, or just one thing in the Constitution has actually allowed all of this to take place. Right. And I'm curious if you had heard that.
Yeah, in fact, I'm interviewing a guy, Jeff Weitzman, in about 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. So we got how about?
So it's basically the two-tiered system, right? We've got our birth certificate. We've got a straw man. They put, us basically on the bond market, and they make money from that. And we're indebted to, the crown, the royal crown, essentially. And it's the bar attorneys, which is the British accredited, registry. It's their job to, keep everything in check. And so what you do is you realize that, like, around, for instance, private membership associations, PMAs, that is a whole other system that is separate from the system we live in, and the same laws that apply to us just apply to the PMAs. And that's what, like, the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, the RNC, the banks, they're all private membership associations. And so what that means, let's say you have a store and you want to go to that store, well, then you have to become a member of that store. It's a private membership association. And so you have to pay like $25 a year or $1 a year, whatever, to be a member of that store. And then basically, as long as you don't do any conscious harm to that person, it's kind of like the rules that apply to everybody else does not apply in that private membership association, that private club, essentially. And so what COVID has really uncovered for us is this two-tiered system that we went. And what happened was, when after the Civil War, we went into debt essentially as a nation. It's like, okay, so you're gonna have to have some collateral, what's it going to be? It's like, oh, it's going to be the future work of American citizens, essentially. So what we're going to do is when they're born, we're going to take them, they've got a certain value, put it on the bond market, and we're going to indebt them, and we're going to make money off of them, off the bond market, and they're the collateral for you guys basically bankrupting yourselves. And that's what the bankers swept in. And if you now use this to this day as essentially collateral.
Yeah.
And so we've been in control of this banking system, a Rothschild system for, oh my gosh, well, really for like 100 and some years, since really the Civil War. So it was a lot more than 100 and some years, but yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to Jeff myself, and I look forward to listening to yours. So yeah, I mean, I find it so fascinating that this one thing has allowed them to get away with all this because it's a contract, and Congress shall pass no law impairing the obligation of contract, and it applies to us, and we can create private contracts and take ourselves.
COVID blew that up when we were like, what do we do? Again, right? We had this huge challenge. The world's coming crashing down. The way we've been going cannot continue. And it created this pressure cooker where we just blew out, and we started finding other ways to exist and to survive. And now PMAs, when we were first talking about them 3.5 years ago, people were like, PM what? Nobody knew, right? The whole bond market, all this stuff, that really, I mean, there's always this undercurrent of knowledge, but that just exploded onto more of the mainstream because of COVID, which was an unintended consequence.
Yep. Well, I feel like we sort of skimmed the surface today, and there's so much more we could talk about maybe another time. Thank you. I have 2 more questions. One will just be about what you're up to and where people can find you, but I'd love to know what your definition of freedom is.
Where you can find me is Reinette Senum's fogwarnexpress.substack.com. I also, which we did not get into, I have some geoengineering work I'm doing. Trying to pinpoint why we're getting all this heavy metal and rain and snow.
I definitely want to talk to you about that.
Yes. And so you can go to saveourskies.org, find the work there, or there's also Gen 7, GEN for Generation 7, and then 7 is SEVEN, gen7.org. Find stuff there too. So I'm working on that kind of stuff. And my definition of freedom is to pursue whatever it is you want unbridled, right? Pursue whatever it is you want unbridled, and as long as you don't cause any harm to anybody, but without interference. The government is not here to negotiate, is not here to referee, it is not here to permit or to license your activities. You can do whatever you want, and it's a government's job actually to protect those freedoms and your constitutional rights, and that's as far as the involvement should be with the government.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Reinette. You're an amazing woman and human being, and I'm just so grateful you're out there doing the work you're doing. And yeah, I'd love to talk to you about chemtrails. That's a huge topic for me that feels important to shine a light on. So thank you so much. Yeah, I look forward to listening to that Jeff Weitzman.
I'll be coming out, I think, beginning of next week, probably. So. And congratulations on what you're doing. It's fabulous.
Thank you so much. All right. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye, everybody.